Thank you so much for staying with us, and it's such a pleasure to be here to host this panel discussion, and it was such an extraordinary film. My name is Dr. Peng, and I'm a computational artist and head of computer animation at University of the Arts London, London College of Communication. So it's such a real pleasure to chair this panel on Ne Zha 2, and we're fortunate to be joined by our 4 distinguished panelists, each of whom brings deep insights from their perspective fields. Dr. Malcolm Cook, Associate Professor of Film at University of Southampton, whose scholarship spans animation, history, silent film, and media aesthetics. Finnigan Morris, a seasoned voice actor whose work in animation and games have contributed to cross-cultural storytelling. For instance, his work on the multi-award-winning game Black Myth Wukong. And Beverly, a playwright, director, and filmmaker whose creative work often interrogates the narrative structure, identity, and social-political themes. And Professor Kerry, Professor of Chinese Studies and Director of the Lao China Institute at the King's College London, a former First Secretary at the UK Embassy in Beijing, whose insights into Chinese cultural diplomacy will add a really fascinating layer to our discussion today. So just to share a little bit, I think, insights from my own perspective as well. I grew up in China, so it's fascinating to see multiple versions of Ne Zha's story growing up, and it's still incredible to see from this modern interpretation and this sort of love and hate and heroism and struggle and challenge. I think I cried a little bit. I don't know what if it happened to you, but I just wanted to maybe start with the first question with Malcolm about the aesthetics of the animation. So many Hollywood animated films are embracing more stylized animation, for instance, in Spider-Verse, Puss in Boots, and The Last Wish. So I wonder, how does Ne Zha 2 fit into this global trend, or does it take a different path?
Yeah, thank you. As you've all seen, I think this is a film that really has great scale and visual complexity, and really tries to push boundaries about what animation can achieve in lots of ways. And clearly that has some comparison to, for example, the Spider-Verse films. I think that is at that level of ambition rather than a kind of visual similarity. I think they're doing quite different things aesthetically in some respects, but that ambition and desire to push Chinese animation to be something new and distinctive and different is clearly evident. The character arc of Ne Zha, the protagonist, is interesting because it mirrors this external desire to progress and come of age, if you like, that at the start, the film in some respects does resemble the kinds of Hollywood films that have been very popular in China and everywhere, of course. At the start, the character is this caricatured, cartoony figure. The kind of bodily humor that predominates at the start of the film, the training sequence where they're trying to come to terms with two identities within the single body that has parallels to, say, Ratatouille. Lots of other films have those kind of training sequences and so on. But as the film progresses, we see Ne Zha sort of transforms, and transformations, of course, are a very important characteristic of animation, and we could always come back to that, but transforms into something else, and we see this increasing ambition to have scale and the sheer complexity of what's happening by the final sequences. Of course, there are other reference points as well with video games. The kind of level structure and the boss level battles clearly has some comparisons to video games, and equally, Japanese animation or anime is clearly a reference point with some of the stylistic choices, that the willingness to go into abstract spaces for some of the battles and reject a kind of concrete verisimilitude with the world, or even the character designs and so on, clearly have some relations there. But overall, you see this arc from something that's maybe quite familiar, especially for Western audiences, or things like Kung Fu Panda that were, of course, very popular in China and were designed to meet this huge audience that's clearly evident in the success of this film, but go beyond that by the end of the film, and we're seeing something really quite different, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it's exciting to also see there's sort of resemblance and similarities to this global trend, but there's authenticity to the Chinese animator, and I think that's something quite exciting about it. So also feel free to chime in if anybody has any thoughts about any of the questions I'm about to ask. So the next question I've got is for Finnigan. Turning to performance and character embodiment in animation, we often talk about the synthesis between visual expressiveness and vocal nuance. So my question is about, as voice actors and animators work together to bring characters to life, how well does the Chinese dubbing in Ne Zha 2 balance the voice performance with expressive character animation?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really struck me about the film was not only the character design. Each character looks incredibly distinctive, and it immediately tells you a lot about who they are just visually, but also the way that they are animated. There's no generic animation in it whatsoever. Each character has their own physicality and tension, and from a voice acting perspective, these two things can obviously inform one another. Typically, you'll record those lines beforehand, and they will inform the animator's decision. And as you were saying, I think symbiosis is exactly the right word. I think particularly Wei Yang's performance as Shen Gongbao is really lovely because he's such a high-strung, physically precise character, and that's very, very clear. I'm not a Mandarin speaker, but that is in his performance right there. So yeah, I think it's communicated extremely well through all of the characters. I think also Ne Zha's teacher as well. He's another great example. His voice is so up and down and bing, boom, 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 and that's done, it's in his face, it's in his movements, it's in everything he does. Counterbalanced by some very nice serious moments, which again, reflected in the animation and the voice performance. So yeah, I think there's been, in this film, a great attention to detail in that regard, both from the vocal performances and from the animation department. Like I said, there's been a real labor of love. Like I said, nothing feels generic. Nothing feels like, it's 5:45 on a Friday afternoon, let's go home, boys. It feels like every single inch of motion and every single line of dialogue and every effort has been scrutinized, but not done in a scientific way, done with a lot of passion. So yeah, I think it's an excellent demonstration of that symbiosis between animator and voice actor.
Yeah. Well, that's brilliant. Thank you. So I've got the next question for Beverly. As someone whose work spans both scripted drama and documentary and improvisation, how does the storytelling in Ne Zha 2 balance traditional Chinese mythology with modern cinematic scriptwriting techniques?
When I saw this question, I kept thinking that I was looking at the perspective of how can Chinese mythology fit in sort of Western cinema. But when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, actually, Western cinema has been fighting to sort of fit into global mythology. There's a very famous writer called Joseph Campbell, who wrote in the 1940s, looking at global myths. And he wrote a hero, I think it was A Hero Has 1,000 Faces, where he was exploring what he called the monolith, that we have the same myth, it's just we have it in different languages. So the hero rescuing the community rescuing his village, that's a global myth. You know, if for anyone who's ever seen the original Star Wars was very much influenced by Joseph Campbell. So what do you have? You have Luke Skywalker, who's the hero, who's rescuing the universe, and also who has a demon father. You find out at the end of the series that Darth Vader is his father. So I just felt that it was less about watching this. To me, it felt much more, not so much about how is Chinese mythology fitting into Western cinema. It was more about how Western audiences are catching up with global stories. That's what I felt, you know. And I think the film is quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's often, you know, we go to cinema. It's just stories are very. I mean, for me, I don't find a lot of relatability there.
Yeah.
I don't see representations, and I don't feel something. You know, where there was a scene where the Ne Zha's mother was trying to ask Ne Zha to eat well, to take care of himself before he went off. And that reminded me of my own mother before I came here.
Yeah.
You know, it's just something that I felt was so extraordinary to be able to see on big screen. So that's really heartfelt.
And that's what I felt very much. I felt that often sometimes with Western animation, with Pixar, it's something, it doesn't feel very real. So even though it was telling this quite massive story, this epic story, those human touches made it feel much more real, much more relatable to me.
Sort of like universal human elements that's common in all of us. And I think, you know, as much as there is very clearly strong Chinese cultural mythological representations in the film, that doesn't alienate you from it at all, because you have those wonderfully human moments and messages within it. And I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. A lot of Western cinema is missing that and addressing sort of surface things and not that really meaningful root beneath.
Or looking toward the East, you know, for inspiration.
Yeah. And it's also incredibly difficult to just convey this complex story through animated techniques and to Western audience. We're here in London, so and it's all Chinese as well. You're gonna have to understand the language doesn't translate well, I think, all the time, because there's no certain words are exactly representing what's been said in Chinese. So I think they've done an incredibly good job in terms of that. So thank you, Beverly. I wanted to bring the conversation towards cultural impact. So the next question is for you, Kerry. So we know that cultural production is increasingly strategic, especially in animation, where the identities and aesthetics and values can be projected globally. So how does the success of Chinese animated films, like Ne Zha, to contribute to China's cultural diplomacy on a global stage?
Yeah, well, look, thank you. It's great to be here today. I remember when I was studying Chinese in the early 90s, how hard it was to find a Chinese film. I remember, I think it was Cheng Haige's Farewell My Concubine. I don't know if you remember that. It came out in, I think, 1993. And there was one cinema in London showing it. Really hard to find. And so it's really great today that actually it's not difficult to find, well, all kinds of cinema, but certainly you know, an animated film like this that hopefully will be really, really a big success outside of China. I know it's been a massive hit in China. I have to say, I had big problems keeping up with the speed at which people spoke in Chinese, and some of their accents were completely out of the window, right? I think Shenbao, Gong Shenbao, I kind of understood him, right? Everyone else, I was completely lost. So I had to look at the subtitles, and they went really quickly too. So, you know, it's kind of fascinating to see these things. I don't know, I'm a little bit surprised because I don't know how easy it is for a non-Chinese audience to kind of relate to the narrative grammar. The reason why I say that is because it's something I struggle with. I remember reading the 西游记, you know, the Journey to the West, and it's extremely complicated. I know there are lots of Western narratives that are really, really, or you know, Russian narratives or other narratives that are very complicated. But it's always something that's quite difficult because I get the feeling that there are these sort of multi-strands, not in this particularly, but you know, kind of, it's always quite a thing to try and just acclimatize to. And I'd be really fascinated to see how critics kind of receive it. I don't know if the critics have already responded to it in, you know, in its release in Britain. I think it's just been released. It released, hasn't it?
Yeah, last week.
It'd be really interesting to see how they respond to it. As in terms of sort of cultural promotion as a thing, I mean, I was thinking about this earlier today. In 2008, during the Beijing Olympics, it was really, really a big moment. There was a big campaign in Britain called Think China, I think, or China Now. And I do remember, you know, there was this idea that suddenly there was this thing called Chinese culture, and it would be extremely, you know, people could relate to it. There were different programs. There were things in London. There was a film festival, I think. And I guess what's sort of interesting, and it's sort of maybe slightly kind of, I don't know, like a discordant thing to say today, but why 17 years later, it's still something that needs to be promoted? Because shouldn't we have kind of, you know, it's not like it's not accessible now. I mean, there are, what, 200,000 Chinese students in Britain? I mean, there's Chinese, very accessible on the internet. So I don't know whether it's because a lot of effort has gone recently, particularly since the pandemic, into investing in a certain image of China, which just won't go away, which is that it's different, right? It's different. And that, well, it's got good and bad, but it certainly just doesn't easily go. And, you know, kind of, we're all sort of trading in this. And my job partly is to sort of just say, well, I'm trying to kind of make that difference something people can understand in a non-Chinese, Chinese-speaking, non-Chinese cultural context. But I don't think it's easy. In surveys, just finally, in surveys of, you know, particularly British attitudes towards China, there's lots of variation. There's all sorts of different kind of views of China as a country and maybe as a culture, but as a country. The one thing across all age groups that is common is this idea that there's something unknowable about China. It's very weird. I mean, these are not my words. It's what comes across in these surveys. And I kind of think it's strange with the amount of exposure that's still there. And I wonder why. I mean, it's not something I can obviously answer or we can answer today. But it sort of just will not shift. It will not shift.
Yeah.
Can I come to that point? I think because there's a Chinese film festival called Odyssey that happens yearly here in London. And what I love about Odyssey is it gives you an opportunity to see indie Chinese films, often the ones that don't get distribution. And what's always struck me when I've seen those films is again, how amazing they are and how eclectic and different and also how you're saying with Chinese culture, there's that element of the unknowing. What I found when I've seen some of the films is that, you know, I see a version of me living in Beijing, you know, a struggling dancer, you know, versions of myself at different times in my life. I think the problem is lack of access. I think that there's been a big lack of distribution in this country. I don't know why. I don't know if that's the resistance of distributors and if people don't have access to see those stories, then they don't actually have a window into a culture. That's really no different from our own. So I think that's the big problem.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think, yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that's really important, the value, and especially from my point of view, the animation. I think the comparison with anime, you know, this film to me seems like an equivalent of what happened with Akira, for example, in the late 80s, early 90s, where suddenly a Western audience could see the power and interest in this, and that there's an opportunity there to build an audience and to gain more understanding. Because now, I mean, I find my students are as familiar, you know, both UK students and Chinese students are as familiar with Japanese anime as they would be with Disney films. And that they therefore don't see that difference that you were describing, that they feel that's part of their culture. They've grown up watching those things, and they identify with those. And I guess, you know, many people here maybe would say, well, anime is part of my identity and youth and growing up. So I think there's a great opportunity there for a film like this to build those things, but it can take quite a while to build up. If we think from, say, Akira, and then when Spirited Away came out, where we are now, where The Boy and the Heron was released and was a sort of mainstream film that was accepted by a lot of audiences, I think, without even thinking about this is a Japanese film. They just understood it as a new film they wanted to see.
And I think lessons can be learned from Indian cinema as well, that you know, for whatever reason, that there isn't that kind of resistance. And when all we imagine is light, which was not, again, an Indian indie film, you know, it wasn't put forward by India, but it should have been for an Oscar. It's a huge hit, you know, and again, there wasn't that resistance there. So it's finding how to get those stories out there, because they deserve to be shown.
Yeah, hopefully it will be a good start now, with the film being so popular, and now the platform is quite accessible, social media and everything.
Because I remember when, I was saying earlier, when Kung Fu Panda, was it Gong Fu Xiong Mao? Is that right? Kung Fu, is that right?
That's really good, yeah.
When that came out in, was it 2008? Or it was around about the Olympics. I remember, because WeChat had just started then, or was it Sino Weibo? And there was like this massive kind of complaint by a bunch of Chinese netizens that why did Americans produce this film, right? Why can't, you know, we Chinese produce a film which is... So I don't know, I mean, I don't know, is this, I mean, Ne Zha is kind of like, in a sense, like China doing that now, kind of telling its own story for itself, or telling its narratives and its stories for itself. Because I do remember back then there was this sort of very big frustration that, you know, Chinese animation was always quite strong and Chinese storytelling is very strong. Why were there kind of, you know, foreigners telling Chinese stories? And so, like Mulan, you know, God help us, Mulan, oh boy, anyway, you know, that kind of stuff. So I guess that this is, yeah, it's great that this is, and I hope it's a massive, massive success, because it's, you know, kind of just wonderful that China's producing these films.
Yeah, yeah. And not to mention about the dialect, I don't know if you all can hear the variations of dialects that they have in this film. It's insane.
Who, the fat guy, the monk, right? What was his dialect? What the hell was going on there?
I have no idea, but I know it's that's the Sichuan dialect. Yeah.
Where dialect? Sichuan. Oh, no wonder. Yeah.
Anybody from there?
Yeah, I'm from there.
Was it representative?
Yeah, very cool.
Well, they did a good job. I'd like to pose a final question to everybody here on stage. As we discussed, so Ne Zha is deeply rooted in Chinese mythology. So how do you think the film balanced staying true to its cultural regions while making the story more accessible to a global audience?
I think one of the great strengths of the film was it didn't feel the need to spoon feed you any of that. And I have a very approximate knowledge of this cosmology. So it actually helped hook me into the film, because I was sort of going, okay, what's this guy doing? And, oh, he's affiliated with those guys and they're this. And it just sort of, it allowed you to follow those questions and discover them throughout the film, which it was nice to have that breathing room for once, to just let these characters and these situations be and be evident in just how they are. So, you know, I think there's a very unabashed sort of representation of what these mythologies and cosmologies are. You know, we're talking about the deification war. I have no idea what that is, but I am looking forward to it. It sounds awesome. Yeah, like I said, I feel that it breadcrumbs you along quite gently and sort of sucks you in slowly, and things sort of just come together as the narrative and various story arcs come together, and you sort of go, oh, that's what these people are in relation to these ones. Okay. It's also got me very interested to see the first one now. Can we run a double feature? That'd be very fun, I think. Yeah, I think it's quite happy sitting in its own sort of cultural moray and allowing you to explore that as a viewer, which I think is a great strength. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I guess I'm especially interested in the questions of the kind of individualism versus collectivism that goes on here. And from, I mean, we could talk about the cultural implications of that, but from an animation point of view, one of the key points is that animation is this huge collective effort. If you know, we all sat and watched those credits there, the huge number of credits going through there, huge numbers of animation studios and teams involved in making a film like this. And that, again, in the narrative itself is played through, where American Western films very often will just emphasize the hero and the individual. And although this is a film that has a hero's title, at the same time, there's a constant tension at play about you know, his role within the wider community, and then those scenes of huge scale, which of course are computationally very difficult, very complex, huge amounts of time and labor go into those, even though they seem very seamless when we watch them. The film is playing through some of those questions of individualism versus collectivism, and the animation should be doing that, and putting forward the idea of something different from the American individualist model that we so often see in a lot of narratives, I think.
Yeah.
No, I really agree with that, because I think that American animation tends to be focused on individual characters, and also tends to be kind of quite simplistic, where, you know, you're really aware when you're watching this, it's adapted from a novel, that it's a sequel of a previous one, and that you do have all these different factions within the community, these rivalries between families, you know, as well as the focus on the hero. And I love the fact that it doesn't aim down to you. It's as if the director, who I was amazed to find out he's self-taught as an animator, that the director has accepted, okay, there are going to be a few things you may not understand, but just hang in there. You know, the general arc of the story will carry you, you know, with it.
Well, you can't go wrong with dragons. Never go, no, that never doesn't give you good things. I suppose Taoism is a sort of an animated religion, really. I mean, it's sort of very dramatic, and I mean, I kind of think that people have a knowledge, you know, some knowledge of yin and yang, and, you know, kind of how opposites in the universe sort of clash with each other. So I think that's pretty accessible. I mean, the Tao Te Ching in you know, in English is very, very popular. So I think that part is pretty effective, pretty accessible. And it's a very, you know, tremendously dramatic. It doesn't really, there's not a second when you're able to relax, really. So it's kind of really a roller coaster. I feel like I'm going to have to go and get some barley water now to calm myself down. But thanks, it's been really great to see it, and such a wonderful audience. So, you know, I've really learnt a lot today. Thank you.
Yeah, I also think the you know, the mythology itself, and I in my memory, I don't know how much this is adhering to the original writing, because I keep having the thoughts in my head, thinking that that's not exactly how I remembered, you know, growing up. They weren't so close, or having this rivalry relationship, or exactly how it was depicted in the film. But I loved it. I just loved whatever the director was giving it to me. I didn't care whether it was so original.
But isn't that the joy of myths, that they can always be reinterpreted?
Yeah, exactly. And all I could think about is that how the environment and how the story was portraying the character, and it's so much relatable to me, and then I just genuinely moved by everything. So thank you so much for all of these rich and nuanced perspective. So we now have a few minutes. I would like to open the questions to the audience. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll have somebody sending the mic to you.
Hi, hello. Thank you for the panel. It's really amazing. I want to ask a question just for our professors, just individual preference. It's like, what's the percentage of the balance between the Ne Zha, like the small cute Ne Zha, and the large nature Ne Zha in number 3?
The percentage of the... what
The 50-50, or like, it's like the time when we talk about the Ne Zha, small Ne Zha, or large Ne Zha in number 3. Is that the percentage time?
The percentage of time, as in like how much time they've shown up in the movie. I don't know if anybody has any insight to this.
70%? I don't know. Why are you interested? Why?
I'm studying like fashion marketing in LCF, so I still like want to analysis what is the show time between the Ne Zha, and then they want like make more time and producers.
Oh, okay, I understand. Yeah.
I wouldn't even be in to be able to answer that.
I mean, I mean, in terms of screen time, obviously the final version is only there for a very short amount of time, but I think it's quite symbolic, that transformation, isn't it? That it does indicate. And it will be interesting to see what happens with a sequel. I mean, the end sets up a sequel pretty strongly, I think, and the success means that there'll be a sequel. Whether the caricatured, cartoony version comes back or not, I think, I'm extremely curious to know that. I understand this film's also been very successful with merchandising and things like that, and the kind of cartoony character is about merchandising and that outside success, but at the same time, the kind of ambition of the film at the end is to say, look, there's something new here. We can go beyond just Kung Fu Panda. And that character, the caricature style, is sort of rooted in something else, and that the final version of him perhaps suggests a future, a difference. So I'm curious to see what the sequel will look like. Yeah.
And I do like, in terms of character arc, I do like the fact that it's 70% little Ne Zha. And it's at the very end that you see this transformation and you see this bigger self. So that does tie again into that myth of the hero as well, going on this journey and facing all these adversities and then ending up a bigger person because of it.
Yeah, I think we've got time for one more question. Sorry.
Good afternoon. So I'm from the same city with the director of this movie. It's called Sichuan Luzhou. So I'm very proud of he, even though we don't know each other. And I knew from the internet today that this movie has earned 20 billion yuan in box office. So it's such a huge box office success. And I really like this movie. I think the images were very beautiful. They were like Chinese traditional paintings. And it was both touching and thought-provoking. I was laughing and crying. So I'm wondering why this movie can achieve such a huge box office success from your point of view. Thank you.
In China?
Around the world. Around the world, I think. Yeah, it's ranked in the 5th in the whole history. Yeah, so it's making a record.
Well, I don't think the film's had the chance to become a global phenomenon just yet. I get a strong feeling it might get there. But obviously, as I understand, the story of Ne Zha is like a huge cultural milestone in China. You know, it's something every Chinese school kid learns. At least that's my impression. Is that correct, gang? That's sort of everything everyone knows. So when you get stories like that that are sort of totemic within a culture, then when they're done with this level of craft and attention and passion behind them, then they're going to attract an audience that's going to receive it very, very, very well. The work will stand on its own. People will come to it. I think also, obviously, there's a lot of artistic choices in it that are absolutely stunning. I mean, the bit where Shen Gongbao cuts open the sky to let in the demons from the world, this sort of just sprung to my mind. I sort of thought, that's what CGI is for, you know, to be able to produce visuals like that, to go absolutely wild with it. So yeah, I think that's, the fact that it's such a cultural touchstone is obviously a massive contributor to its success. But also a lot of the artistic choices that have clearly made it appeal to a very broad audience. And I think it will also find one further afield than China. Let's see what happens.
I think as well, sometimes films are very lucky, and when they come out, you know, the sort of they catch the zeitgeist. And what I really felt, because when I was reading the reviews, and the reviews have been glowing that I've read here in London, and this is the highest grossing animated film of all time. I think it's about hope. You know, at a time when there's a lot of gathering dark clouds around the world, it shows that one person can make a difference. So to me, that's what's probably audiences are taking away.
With three dragons.
With three dragons.
With
For
dragons.
being a huge Game of Thrones fan, yes.
Paul,
Love
don't
the
forget
dragons.
Albing's dad.
Yeah, that's really well said. I think it also shows people are interested in this part of the culture and wanted to know more. So that's all the time we have. So my sincere thanks to all the panelists, Malcolm, Finnigan, Beverly, and Kerry, for your generosity and insight, and to all of you engaging with us. And I think this film reminds us that mythology is not just static, and it's something that we continuously reimagine through new technologies, new languages, new audiences. So with that being said, have a wonderful evening, and let the conversation continue beyond this room. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.